At my son's lavish wedding, they forced me to sit all alone in the back. Your poverty is going to embarrass us, his fiancée sneered. Suddenly, a man in an expensive suit sat next to me. Just pretend you're my date. When my son saw us together, his face went white. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But to understand how I got to that moment of humiliation, I need to tell you the whole story from the beginning. It all started 3 hours earlier, when I arrived at the most exclusive hotel in Midtown Manhattan for the wedding of my son Ethan. I had worked double shifts for months just to afford a decent dress and make it to this celebration. As a retired nurse, with a modest social security check, every dollar mattered. Walking into the lobby, I felt completely out of place. Crystal chandeliers hung from the 20-foot ceilings. Polished marble gleamed underfoot. And elegant women sported jewelry that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. But this was the wedding of my Ethan, my only son, the one I'd raised alone since he was 3. The event coordinator greeted me with a forced smile. Ms. Hayes? Her last name caught my attention, the same as my future daughter-in-law. It's Miller, I told her. I'm Patty Miller. I'm the groom's mother. Her expression shifted subtly. Oh, right. We have a bit of a situation with the main table. There was a misunderstanding with the seating chart. She led me toward the main ballroom, where 200 people were settling into round tables decorated with floral centerpieces that looked like small works of art. Your spot is right this way, Megan said, guiding me toward the very rear of the room. As we walked, the tables grew simpler, the flowers less elaborate. She finally stopped at a small table tucked into the corner, partially hidden behind a decorative column. There must be a mistake, I said, feeling a knot in my stomach. I'm the groom's mother. Megan consulted her tablet with an uncomfortable look. According to my instructions, this is your assigned spot, table 47. I looked around. It was so far from the altar I'd need binoculars to see the ceremony. The nearby tables were filled with people who clearly didn't know Ethan, friends of the Hayes family, judging by their conversations about their golf club memberships and Martha's Vineyard homes. I think there's been a mix-up, I insisted. My son told me I'd be at the head table. Megan lowered her voice. Ms. Miller, the instructions came directly from the Hayes family. If there's an issue, you'll need to discuss it with them. Just then, Tiffany appeared like a vision in her designer wedding gown. At 28, she was undeniably beautiful. Platinum blonde hair, perfect skin, and a figure that screamed years of personal trainers and spa treatments. Tiffany greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her blue eyes. It's so sweet you could make it. Her condescending tone made me feel as if she'd done me a favor by inviting me to my own son's wedding. Tiffany, I think there was a mistake with my table, I said, keeping my composure. Megan has me assigned to table 47. Tiffany's smile became even faker. There's no mistake, Patty. I thought you'd be more comfortable here, with people more on your socioeconomic level. Her eyes scanned my dress, the nicest I could afford, but one that probably cost less than her shoes. It's the furthest table from the altar, I pointed out, feeling my dignity crumble piece by piece. I won't be able to see the ceremony. Oh, Patty. Tiffany sighed as if I were being terribly dramatic. Look, I know this is tough for you, but my family paid for this celebration. That's $50,000 just in flowers. I can't have awkward situations at the main tables. Awkward situations, I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. Tiffany leaned closer, dropping her voice. Your poverty is going to embarrass us. My guests aren't accustomed to certain kinds of people. I hope you understand. Her words hit me like a physical slap. I'd raised Ethan alone after his father abandoned us. I worked double shifts at the hospital to pay for his education, his books, his clothes. I sold my car to help with his college expenses. I skipped meals so he could eat at the cafeteria with his friends. Does Ethan know you put me here? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It was his idea. Tiffany lied shamelessly. He said it would be better for everyone if you kept a low profile. That couldn't be true. My Ethan, who called me every Sunday, who constantly thanked me for all my sacrifices, who had promised me his wedding would be our joint celebration. I walked toward my assigned table, feeling the stares of curiosity and pity from the other guests. The chair creaked under my weight. Clearly lower quality than the other tables. There was no card with my name, just a handwritten number on cheap paper. As I sat alone, watching families gather at beautifully decorated tables, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Deep, absolute shame. Not for my financial situation, but for letting myself be treated this way. Then I heard a masculine voice next to me. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up and met eyes with a man of about 60, immaculately dressed in a suit that screamed money and power. He had perfectly styled silver hair, steel blue eyes that seemed to look right through me, and a presence that commanded instant respect. "The table is empty," I replied, confused why someone so clearly important would want to sit at the exile table. He sat down elegantly and extended his hand. "Alexander Harding, it's a pleasure to meet you." His name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Patty Miller, the groom's mother. His eyes lit up with something I couldn't decipher. "The groom's mother is sitting here. That is interesting." "It's a long story," I murmured, suddenly ashamed of my situation. Alexander glanced toward the altar where Ethan was nervously adjusting his tuxedo, looking handsome and elegant. "Your son is very lucky to have you." "I don't think he feels the same way," I admitted, unable to stop myself. "Then he's a fool," Alexander said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But allow me to do something for you. When they start looking over here, when they notice I'm here, pretend you came with me." "Excuse me?" "Trust me," he said with an intensity that made me shiver, "and watch their faces when they see us together." I didn't understand what was happening, but there was something in his voice that made me nod. At that moment, Ethan turned in our direction, probably looking for me to wave before the ceremony. When his eyes landed on Alexander, my son went completely pale. Ethan walked toward us with hesitant steps. His face had lost all color. "Mr. Harding," my son stammered, I didn't know you would be here." Alexander rose slowly, with the grace of a predator. "Ethan, good to see you on your wedding day. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But you need to know what happened after that tense moment." "Do you two know each other?" I asked, looking between my son and this mysterious man who had just changed the entire dynamic of the event. "Mr. Harding is—" Ethan swallowed hard. "He's one of the senior partners at the firm where I work." Alexander smiled, but there was something predatory in that smile. "Not just that, Ethan. I'm the senior partner, the founder, your boss." He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "And apparently I'm your mother's date for this beautiful celebration." "Your date?" Ethan looked ready to pass out. "Oh yes," Alexander continued, clearly enjoying my son's discomfort. "Patty and I have a lot of catching up to do. 40 years is a long time." My eyes widened. 40 years? Alexander looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like time had stopped. There was something familiar in those blue eyes, something that made me think of— "It can't be," I whispered. "What can't be?" Ethan asked, looking between us with growing panic. Alexander extended his hand to me. "May I have this dance, Ms. Miller?" The band had started playing a slow song as guests settled. A few couples were already moving toward the makeshift dance floor. I took his hand, feeling an electricity I hadn't experienced in decades. As we danced slowly, Alexander spoke softly. "Just for me. You look beautiful, Patty. The years have been kind to you." "Alex, is that really you?" My voice trembled. "The same guy who promised to come back for you 40 years ago," he murmured. "The same guy who never forgot you." Memories began flooding back like an avalanche. Alexander Harding, the 20-year-old I'd loved with the passion of my 18. The law student who worked part-time at a gas station to pay for his studies. The guy who promised me he'd get a scholarship to Harvard and come back for me. "But you never came back," I said, feeling tears threaten to fall. "I did come back." His voice hardened. 3 years later, with a Harvard degree and money in my pocket. "But you were gone. I had to move. My mother got sick, and you married Robert Miller," he finished for me. "You had a son." I glanced toward where Ethan was still watching us with growing horror. Ethan is my son," Alexander completed, so low that only I could hear him. The world stopped. The music played on. The couples kept dancing, but for me, everything had frozen in time. "How can you be sure?" Because I hired a private investigator 5 years ago. When Ethan started working at my firm, something about him felt familiar. The way he tilts his head when he thinks, his hand gestures, even his laugh. Alexander squeezed my hand. And then I saw his personnel file. Single mother, father unknown, born exactly 9 months after we broke up. Robert registered him as his own, I murmured. Robert was a good man who helped you when you needed it. But Ethan is my blood. The song ended and we returned to the table. Ethan followed us like a lost puppy. Mom, can I talk to you privately? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Alexander, I replied, feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in years. This is too weird. I don't understand what's going on. Alexander leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. What don't you understand, Ethan? That your mother is accompanied by a successful man, that she's not sitting alone at a hidden table as if she were an embarrassment? Ethan blushed. I didn't know Tiffany. You didn't know? Alexander's voice became dangerously low. You didn't know your wife planned to humiliate your mother. You didn't know she was placed at the furthest table, as if she were an intruder at her own son's wedding? Mr. Harding, with all due respect, respect is shown with actions, Ethan. And today's actions have been very clear. Just then, Tiffany approached with a nervous smile. She had been watching from afar and clearly noticed the tension. Ethan, honey, we need to get ready for the ceremony. Her eyes landed on Alexander with a mix of curiosity and calculation. And you too? Alexander Harding, CEO of Harding and Associates, he replied, standing up to shake her hand. The color drained from Tiffany's face. Even she knew that name, one of the most prestigious and powerful corporate law groups in the country. Mr. Harding, she stammered, what an honor to have you here. I didn't know you knew the family. I've known Patty for many years, he said, putting his arm around my waist protectively. In fact, we are considering making some very important announcements soon. Announcements? Tiffany asked, panic rising in her voice. About our future together, Alexander added, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan and Tiffany exchanged looks of utter horror. The same woman who had called me an embarrassment half an hour earlier now faced the possibility that I was connected to one of the most powerful men in the country. Mom, Ethan tried again. Can we talk after the ceremony? Of course, son, I replied, enjoying the power I felt having Alexander at my side. After the ceremony, Alex and I have a lot to talk to you about. As the couple walked away to prepare, Alexander leaned toward me. Are you ready for them to know the truth? What truth? That their world is about to change forever. The ceremony was a spectacle of sickening luxury. Flowers that cost more than my monthly rent, a violinist who had flown in from Europe, and enough champagne to drown my sorrows for a whole decade. But now, sitting next to Alexander, everything felt different. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But the real revelation came during the exchange of vows. As Ethan promised to love and protect Tiffany, I watched Alexander study my son's every gesture. Look how he moves his hands when he's nervous, he murmured. I do the exact same thing. It was true. Ethan had the same way of adjusting his tie when he was anxious, the same tick of running his hand through his hair, details I had never noticed because Robert, his legal father, was completely different. When did you know? I whispered, the first day he walked into my office 3 years ago. I interviewed him personally because something on his resume caught my eye. When he said his date of birth, I did the math. When I saw him smile, I knew. Tiffany's mother, Carol Hayes, approached our table during the reception. She was a 50-year-old woman who had aged artificially well. Too much Botox, too many fillers, too much surgery. Her dress probably cost more than my car. Mr. Harding, she said with an overly sweet smile. What a wonderful surprise. We didn't know you would honor our celebration with your presence. Alexander stood up courteously. Carol, the honor is mine, especially considering I'm here as the date of the groom's mother. Carol looked at me as if just noticing my existence. Oh, right, Patty. Tiffany told me you two knew each other from way back. Since we were very young, Alexander confirmed, taking my hand. In fact, there are some things about our history that I think the family should know. What kind of things? Carol asked, her smile starting to look strained. Well, Alexander leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone accustomed to dominating any conversation. Patty and I were sweethearts 40 years ago. Very serious, actually. We were going to get married before I left to study at Harvard. Carol blinked several times, processing this information. How romantic, and now you've reconnected. Yes, and we discovered we have a lot more in common than we thought, Alexander said, looking directly toward where Ethan was toasting with some friends, especially when it comes to family. I don't understand, Carol said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was starting to understand. Mrs. Hayes, I interjected, feeling a boldness I hadn't experienced in years. Did your daughter tell you why they seated me at table 47? Carol shifted uncomfortably. Well, seating charts are complicated. She told me my poverty was going to embarrass them, I continued, enjoying watching the woman get paler and paler. That your guests weren't accustomed to a certain kind of people. I'm sure there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Alexander said coldly. Your daughter deliberately humiliated the groom's mother. But the interesting thing is that humiliation allowed me to reconnect with the love of my youth. Carol now looked completely bewildered. The love of your youth? And the mother of my son, Alexander added as if commenting on the weather. The silence that followed was deafening. Carol looked at both of us, then toward Ethan, then back to us. Her brain was processing the information at lightning speed. Your son? Ethan was born exactly 9 months after Patty and I separated. She was pregnant when I left to study, but neither of us knew it. Carol sank heavily into an empty chair. This can't be true. Why not? I asked, feeling a strength I didn't know I had. Because it doesn't fit your narrative that I'm an embarrassment to your family. But Ethan always said his father died when he was little. Robert Miller died when Ethan was 15, I confirmed. He was the only father Ethan ever knew, but he wasn't his biological father. Alexander leaned forward. Which means, Mrs. Hayes, that your son-in-law is my heir, my only heir. The implications of that statement hit Carol like a tsunami. Her daughter had just married the son of the most powerful man in the corporate legal world, the same son whose mother she had tried to publicly humiliate. Does Ethan know? Carol asked in a weak voice. Not yet, Alexander replied, but he will before this reception is over. Just then, Tiffany rushed toward our table, her wedding dress fluttering dramatically behind her. Her perfect makeup was starting to run. She had been crying. Mom, she said to Carol in a broken voice, we have a problem. Ethan just spoke to some of the lawyer guests. Apparently, Mr. Harding isn't just Ethan's boss. He's the founder of the country's most important law group. Ethan could be a partner someday if... She stopped abruptly when she noticed our expressions. If what, dear? Alexander asked with a dangerous smile. If you consider him worthy, Tiffany finished, her previous arrogance completely evaporated. Oh, I consider Ethan very worthy, Alexander said slowly. After all, he is my son. Tiffany staggered as if she'd received a physical slap. Her perfect face completely fell apart. Your son. My biological son, Alexander confirmed. The son I had with Patty 35 years ago. Tiffany looked at me with pure horror. The same woman who had told me my poverty would embarrass them now realized she had humiliated the mother of an heir to a fortune. But you can't prove, she started to stammer. A DNA test? Alexander suggested. Excellent idea. In fact, I already have one scheduled for tomorrow morning. Already? I asked, surprised. I've been waiting for the right moment to approach you both, Alexander admitted, and it seems your daughter gave me the perfect opportunity. Tiffany collapsed into a chair, her $50,000 dress crumpling without her caring. This can't be happening? Oh, but it is happening, I told her, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in decades. The very woman who wasn't worthy of sitting at the main table now turns out to be the mother of the future heir to a legal empire. Carol and Tiffany looked at each other with rising panic. In a matter of minutes, their entire perception of reality had been shattered. What do you want from us? Carol finally asked. Alexander smiled, but it was the smile of a shark. I want you to know exactly who you messed with when you decided to humiliate the woman I love. Ethan appeared at our table like a ghost, his face paler than his white shirt. Mr. Harding, could we speak in private? His voice trembled in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child and had broken something important. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But what he didn't know was that this conversation would change everything forever. There's nothing that can't be said in front of your mother, Alexander replied, remaining seated with the tranquility of a king on his throne. It's just, some people are saying some really strange things. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, that nervous gesture I now knew he'd inherited from Alexander. They say you and Mom, that you knew each other before. We knew each other very well, Alexander confirmed. We were sweethearts for 2 years when we were young. Ethan looked toward me, seeking confirmation. I nodded slowly. Alexander was my first love, son. We broke up when he left to study in the States. But that was 40 years ago, I completed. When I was 18 and he was 20. I watched Ethan do the mental math. His eyes widened when he realized the implications. Mom, are you saying that? I'm saying that when Alexander left for Harvard, I didn't know I was pregnant, I said softly, bracing myself for the impact of my words. Ethan sank heavily into the nearest chair. Pregnant with me? Robert Miller was a good man who helped me when I needed it most, I continued. He raised you as his own son, and for all practical purposes, he was your father. But biologically? Biologically, you are my son, Alexander finished. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan looked at both of us as if we were aliens who had landed at his wedding. This is impossible, he finally murmured. Why impossible? Alexander asked. Because it doesn't fit the story you knew? Because it complicates your new life with the Hayes family? Because if it's true, Ethan stopped, processing all the ramifications. If it's true, then you are the son of the most powerful man in the corporate legal world, a voice said behind us. We turned to see Richard Hayes, Tiffany's father, approaching with a somber expression. He was a 65-year-old man, accustomed to being in control, but now he seemed genuinely worried. Richard, Alexander greeted him coldly. What a memorable wedding you've organized. Alexander, I didn't know you would be here. Richard looked nervously between us. Carol told me some things. Disturbing? Disturbing for whom? I asked, feeling my courage renewed. For the man who allowed his daughter to publicly humiliate me? Richard flushed. Ms. Miller, if there was a misunderstanding? There was no misunderstanding, Alexander interrupted. Your daughter told Patty that her poverty would embarrass them. She sat her at the furthest table as if she were an intruder at her own son's wedding. And now, I added with a smile I'd learned from Alexander, it turns out that this poor, embarrassing woman is the mother of the heir to Harding and Associates. Richard swallowed audibly. Heir? Ethan is my only son, Alexander confirmed. My only heir, which means that someday he will inherit not only my firm, but also my properties, my investments, my complete fortune. How much fortune? Ethan asked weakly. Approximately $2 billion, Alexander replied casually, as if talking about the weather. Richard staggered. Ethan looked ready to throw up. Even I felt the world tilt dangerously. $2 billion, I repeated slowly. Not counting the international properties, Alexander added. I have homes in New York, London, Tokyo, and of course, there's the sprawling ranch in Montana, 12,000 acres that have been in my family for generations. Ethan stood up abruptly. I need air. This is too much. Ethan, I called, but he was already heading toward the terrace. Richard looked at us with a mixture of panic and calculation. Mr. Harding, I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstanding that happened tonight. Misunderstanding? Alexander rose slowly, his imposing height immediately intimidating Richard. Your daughter humiliated the woman I love? You call that a misunderstanding? Tiffany is young. Sometimes she doesn't think before she speaks. Tiffany is a married adult who deliberately hurt an innocent woman, I corrected. Don't make excuses for your daughter's cruel behavior. Just then, Tiffany returned with Carol. Both had been crying, and their perfect makeup was ruined. Dad, Tiffany said in a broken voice, is what Mom told me true? Ethan is truly Alexander Harding's son, Richard confirmed in a heavy voice, and apparently his heir. Tiffany looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was pure horror mixed with the realization that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. "Ms. Miller," she began, but her voice broke. "Patty," I corrected her. "My name is Patty." "Patty," she repeated as if the name burned her tongue. I didn't know." "If you had known who I really was, would you have treated me differently?" I asked, "just because I have connections with money and power?" Tiffany couldn't answer, but her silence was response enough. "That," I told her calmly, "is exactly the problem." Alexander put his hand on my shoulder. "Patty doesn't need to be rich or powerful to deserve respect. She is an extraordinary woman who raised an exceptional son alone. She deserves respect for that, not for her connection to me." "But now that you know the truth," I continued, "you are going to completely change your attitude toward me. You're going to pretend you never treated me badly. You're going to rewrite the history of tonight." Carol nervously stepped forward. "Patty, we can start over. Be a real family." "A family?" I laughed, but there was no humor in my laughter. 3 hours ago, I was an embarrassment that needed to be hidden. Now you want to be family because you discovered I have value. Richard tried to take control of the situation. "Mr. Harding, I'm sure we can find a way to—" "The only way," Alexander interrupted in a dangerously low voice, "is for your family to learn what it means to respect people for who they are, not for what they have." Contemplating the city lights, my son was processing not only the fact that his biological father was alive, but that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't even imagine. "So now what?" I asked. Alexander smiled, that dangerous smile I was starting to recognize. "Now we give them time to process the new reality, and tomorrow we start rebuilding our family." But there was something in his eyes that told me he had plans much more elaborate than simply rebuilding our family. Ethan returned from the terrace with red eyes and a determination I hadn't seen in him since he was a teenager. "I need you to tell me the whole truth," he declared, planting himself in front of us from the beginning. "Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe." But the truth that was about to come out was more complicated than anyone imagined. "The truth," Alexander began, "is that your mother and I loved each other deeply. We planned to get married after I returned from Harvard." "What happened?" Ethan asked, sitting in front of us. I took a deep breath. It was time to tell the whole story. "Your maternal grandfather was very sick, terminal cancer. He needed constant care, and we didn't have money for a private hospital." "My grandfather?" Ethan frowned. "But you always said he died when I was a baby." "He died when you were 6 months old," I confirmed. "But before that, during my pregnancy, I worked at the hospital during the day and cared for him at night. I didn't have time or energy for anything else." Alexander took my hand. "I wrote her letters from Boston, many letters. I never got a reply." "Why did I never receive them?" I said softly. "My mother intercepted them. She thought if I clung to an impossible dream, both the baby and I would suffer." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "Your grandmother knew I was pregnant." "When Alexander's letters arrived, she hid them. She told me he had found another life in the States, that there was no point waiting for someone who had forgotten me." Alexander closed his eyes. "If I had known, what would you have done?" I asked. "Would you have abandoned Harvard, your future?" "I would have returned immediately," he said without hesitation. "I would have married you. We would have raised Ethan together." "But my mother was right about one thing," I continued. "You had a destiny. You were building something important. If you had returned then, you never would have become who you are now." Ethan processed every word. "And Robert, how did he enter the story?" "Robert worked at the hospital as an orderly," I explained. "He was 5 years older than me. Quiet, responsible. When he found out I was pregnant and alone, he offered to help me." "Did you marry him out of convenience?" "I married him because he was a good man who wanted to give us a stable family. And over time, I grew to love him in a different way. Not with the passion I felt for Alexander, but with genuine respect and affection." Alexander shifted uncomfortably. "You loved him?" "Robert was my partner for 15 years. He was your father in every way that matters, Ethan. He taught you how to ride a bike. He helped you with your homework. He deserves to be remembered with respect." "But now I'm here," Alexander said with intensity. 35 years later, but I'm here. Ethan looked between us. And what exactly does that mean? Before we could answer, Tiffany approached shyly. Her wedding dress was wrinkled and her makeup had been poorly retouched. Ethan, can we talk? Not now. Tiffany, please, she insisted in a broken voice. I need to explain. Explain what? Ethan's voice hardened. Explain why you humiliated my mother, why you treated her like trash. I didn't know. Didn't know what exactly? Ethan stood up, facing his brand new wife. Didn't you know she was my mother? Didn't you know she deserved basic respect as a human being? Tears started to stream down Tiffany's cheeks. Ethan, please. Answer my question, my son demanded with a firmness that filled me with pride. Would you have treated my mother differently if you hadn't known about her financial situation? Tiffany couldn't answer, and her silence was deafening. That's all the answer I need, Ethan said coldly. Just then, Richard approached with a desperate expression. Ethan, son, we need to talk as a family. Family? Ethan laughed bitterly. 3 hours ago, your daughter told me it would be better for everyone if my mother kept a low profile. Is that what you call family? Those were extraordinary circumstances. No, Alexander interrupted, standing up slowly. Those were revealing circumstances. They showed exactly what kind of people you are when you think no one important is watching. Richard turned to Alexander with growing panic. Mr. Harding, understand that we deeply respect Ms. Miller. No, I interrupted him, feeling a strength I didn't know I had. You don't respect me. You have never respected me. You only fear me now that you know I'm connected to power. Carol approached with tears in her eyes. Patty, we can fix this. We can be a real family. How? I asked. By pretending tonight never happened? By rewriting history so you aren't the villains? We were protecting you, Tiffany finally exploded. My guests are important people. I couldn't have embarrassing situations at my wedding. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Richard looked horrified by his daughter's words. Embarrassing situations, I repeated slowly. That's how you see me, as an embarrassing situation. Tiffany, Carol murmured, please stop talking. But it was too late. The mask had completely fallen. Ethan looked at his wife with an expression I had never seen on him. Is that what you really think of my mother? Ethan, Yes or no? My son yelled, making several guests turn toward us. Yes, Tiffany whispered, the words pulled from her throat. Yes, I thought your mother was an embarrassing situation. Ethan nodded slowly, as if something important had settled in his mind. Thank you for being honest. Finally. He turned to Alexander and me. I need to know my real father. I need to understand where I truly come from. Ethan, Richard began desperately, think about your future. I am thinking about my future, Ethan replied, and my future does not include people who consider my mother an embarrassment. Alexander smiled proudly. That's my son. But there was something more in Alexander's eyes, something that told me this confrontation had been exactly what he expected, as if he had planned for things to reach precisely this point. What else did he have planned? The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment with the feeling that I had lived a very strange dream. But the 20 missed calls from Ethan and the bouquet of white roses at my door confirmed that everything had been real. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But what I didn't expect was to find Ethan waiting for me at the corner coffee shop when I went out to buy a latte. Mom, he called from a table by the window. He had deep circles under his eyes and was still wearing his wedding shirt, wrinkled and tieless. We need to talk. I sat across from him, noticing he had ordered my favorite coffee, a latte with extra foam, exactly how I liked it. Did you sleep at all? I couldn't, he admitted. I stayed up all night thinking about everything that happened yesterday. And Tiffany? Ethan grimaced. She's at her parents' house. No, we couldn't be in the same room last night. I waited for him to continue, knowing he needed to process this at his own pace. Mom, why did you never tell me about Alexander? Because Robert was your father in every way that mattered, I answered honestly. And because I thought Alexander had a new life, that he had moved on. But I had a right to know. You're right, I admitted. I should have told you when you were older, but every year that passed, it became harder. How do you tell your adult son that the whole story he knows about his origin is incomplete? Ethan drank his coffee in silence for a moment. Yesterday, after you left, I researched Alexander online. And what did you find? That he's even more powerful than he said. Harding and Associates isn't just a law firm, Mom. It's an empire. They have offices in 12 countries. They represent presidents, multinational corporations, European royalty. I felt a knot in my stomach. Ethan. And he never married, my son continued, looking right at me. In 40 years, he never married. Not a single document serious relationship. What are you implying? I'm implying that maybe he never forgot you. Maybe he was waiting all this time. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Patty, it's Alexander. Can you come to my office this morning? There are some things we need to discuss. What kind of things? Things about our future, yours, mine, and Ethan's. I looked at my son, who had obviously overheard the conversation. Can Ethan come? Of course. In fact, I prefer him to come. It's time for him to know his real heritage. An hour later, we were on the 47th floor of the Harding Tower, the sleekest building in Midtown. Alexander's office was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Ethan, Alexander said, standing up from behind a desk that looked like genuine mahogany. Welcome to your true home. My son looked at everything in awe. The walls were covered with diplomas, accolades, and photographs with presidents and celebrities. A glass case exhibited international human rights and social justice awards. It's impressive, Ethan murmured. It's yours, Alexander replied simply. All of this, someday, will be yours. He walked over to an elegant bar in the corner. Coffee, water, something stronger. I have top-shelf bourbon from a private distillery I own in Kentucky. He owns a distillery, I repeated, trying to process the magnitude of Alexander's wealth. I own many things, Patty, and I want to share them with you. He sat across from us, his expression turning serious. But first, we need to talk about what happened last night. We already talked about that, Ethan said. Not completely. Alexander opened a folder on his desk. I've been investigating the Hayes family since I found out about the engagement. Investigating? Ethan asked with surprise. It's a precaution I take with all my important employees. And you, Ethan, are very important. Alexander pulled out several documents. What I found is interesting. What kind of things? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Richard Hayes is in serious financial trouble. His real estate company has been losing money for 3 years. He owes more than $25 million to various banks. Ethan paled. Does Tiffany know? Tiffany not only knows, but yesterday's wedding was a desperate investment. What do you mean? I asked. Alexander turned a page. The reception cost $50,000. Richard took out a loan to pay for it, using as collateral the expectation that Ethan would become a partner at my firm and eventually be able to help the family financially. Ethan was speechless. That's exactly why they humiliated you last night. Patty, Alexander continued, it wasn't just classism. It was strategy. They wanted to make sure Ethan felt ashamed of his modest background, that he would distance himself from you to better fit into their world of appearances. I felt nauseated. Tiffany knew this. Tiffany not only knew, it was her idea. Alexander pulled out another document. I found text messages between Tiffany and her mother, Carol, planning exactly how to handle the problem of Ethan's poor mother. Ethan stood up abruptly. I want to see those messages. Alexander handed him his phone. As Ethan read, his face got paler and paler. She wrote. Ethan swallowed. She wrote that the best strategy was to publicly humiliate me so Ethan would see how much I contrasted with his new life. What else? Alexander asked, though it was clear he already knew the content. That if they managed to make me feel out of place enough, I would isolate myself from Ethan. Ethan put down the phone with trembling hands. That it was better to be cruel once than to deal with me forever. The silence in the office was heavy. He finally understood the magnitude of the betrayal. It hadn't been a cruel impulse. It had been a calculated campaign to isolate me from my own son. So now what? I asked. Alexander smiled, that dangerous smile I now recognized. Now we teach them what happens when they mess with my family? What do you have in mind? Richard Hayes desperately needs a loan to save his company. Guess who controls 3 of the biggest banks in the city? Ethan looked between us. Are you going to deny him the loan? I'm going to do something better, Alexander replied. I'm going to give him a choice. The phone rang exactly at 10 o'clock in the morning, 3 days after the wedding. It was Richard Hayes, his voice trembling and desperate. Mr. Harding, I need to talk to you urgently. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But what Richard didn't know was that Alexander already had everything planned. Of course, Richard, Alexander replied in a neutral voice. Come to my office this afternoon. Bring your wife and Tiffany. Is it necessary for them to come? Very necessary. What we are going to discuss affects the entire family. When he hung up, Alexander turned to me. I was sitting in his office where I had spent the last 3 mornings while he brought me up to date on Ethan's life and told me about his own history. Are you sure you want to be present? He asked me. I wouldn't miss this for the world, I replied, surprised by my own fierceness. Ethan had arrived early, looking more rested but still processing all the information. In the last few days, he had taken a leave from work to assimilate that his boss was his biological father. What exactly are you going to ask them for? Ethan asked. Justice, Alexander replied simply, and a genuine apology. At 3 o'clock sharp, the Hayes family arrived at the office. Richard looked like he had aged 10 years. Carol looked nervous and constantly touched up her makeup. But Tiffany had a defiant expression that I didn't like at all. Richard, Carol, Tiffany. Alexander greeted them with professional coolness. Please take a seat. The family settled into the chairs across from the desk. Ethan and I stood by the windows watching. I understand you need to talk about your financial situation, Alexander began. Richard cleared his throat. Yes, Mr. Harding, as you probably know, my company is going through some temporary difficulties. $25 million in debt, 3 properties in foreclosure, 2 lawsuits from employees for unpaid wages, Alexander recited without consulting any document. It doesn't sound very temporary. We have a restructuring plan, Richard began. That requires capital you don't have, Alexander interrupted. That's why you're here. Yes, Richard admitted, his pride clearly hurt. We need a loan, a considerable loan. How much? $30 million. Alexander leaned back in his chair. That's a substantial sum. What collateral are you offering? Our remaining properties. The company's accounts receivable. Richard was sweating now. Properties that are already mortgaged and accounts receivable from clients who are also in financial trouble, Alexander observed. Not very solid collateral. Carol spoke for the first time. Mr. Harding, you know our family. We are respectable people with a reputation. Reputation? Alexander leaned forward. What kind of reputation do you have with people you consider inferior? The silence was uncomfortable. Tiffany shifted in her seat. I don't understand the question, Richard said. The question is simple. How do you treat people you think can't help or hurt you? We treat everyone with respect, Carol lied. Oh, really? Alexander pulled out his phone and put the text messages on the large office screen. Is this what you call respect? The messages appeared on the screen, clearly visible. Tiffany, we have to do something about Ethan's mother. She's an embarrassment. Carol, what do you suggest? Tiffany, we seat her as far away as possible and tell her it's for her own good. Carol, what if Ethan gets upset? Tiffany, better. I want him to see how much his mother contrasts with our family. Maybe then he'll realize he needs to choose. The room was absolutely silent. Carol looked horrified to see her own words. Richard seemed to want to disappear. But Tiffany. Those messages are private, Tiffany said in a loud, clear voice. You had no right to obtain them. I have the right to protect my family, Alexander replied coldly, and that includes Patty. Your family? Tiffany laughed bitterly. You didn't even know her a week ago. I've known her for 40 years, and I've loved her for 40 years. Ethan approached his wife. Tiffany, can you at least apologize? Admit that what you did was wrong. Apologize for what? Tiffany stood up, her victim mask completely falling away. For protecting my own wedding? for not wanting my special day ruined by family drama. Family drama, I repeated, feeling my blood boil. Yes, Tiffany yelled. Her poverty was embarrassing. Her cheap clothes were embarrassing. Her entire presence was embarrassing. Ethan was petrified. Tiffany, it's the truth, Ethan. Your mother doesn't fit into our world. She never will fit in. And the fact that she now turns out to be connected to money doesn't change what she really is. And what I really am, I asked, walking toward her. A retired nurse with no education who lives in a cheap apartment and drives an old car. The words spilled from Tiffany like poison. Money can't buy you class. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard and Carol seemed to want to disappear underground. Thank you, Alexander said calmly. That's exactly what I needed to hear. What? Richard asked, confused. I needed to confirm that your daughter's cruelty toward Patty wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a genuine expression of who she is as a person. Alexander stood up and walked toward the window. Richard, about that loan you need? Yes. Richard clung to hope. The answer is no. What? Not only am I not going to lend you the money, but I'm going to make sure no bank in the city does. You can't do that, Tiffany yelled. I can and I will, Alexander replied calmly. In fact, I already made some calls this morning. Richard stood up, staggering. Mr. Harding, please reconsider. Oh, there is a way for me to reconsider, Alexander said with that dangerous smile. Which? Your daughter can give a genuine apology to Patty, on her knees, in front of witnesses, and publicly promise never to mistreat anyone again because of their financial situation. Tiffany gaped. Never. Then your family will lose everything, Alexander said simply. The decision is yours. But as I watched Tiffany's defiant expression, I knew this was far from over. Tiffany stood up, her fists clenched, her face red with fury. I'd rather lose everything than humiliate myself in front of this woman. Her words cut the air like broken glass. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But what we didn't know was that someone else had been listening to the entire conversation. This woman, I repeated, feeling something dangerous awaken in my chest. This woman who raised the son you just married. My husband, Tiffany yelled. Ethan is my husband now, and I won't allow you to ruin our marriage with your presence. Ethan approached Tiffany slowly. Is that what you really think? That my mother ruins our marriage? Look what's happening, Tiffany gestured wildly. Look at the drama she's caused. Before last night, we were happy. No, Ethan said with a calm that surprised me. Before last night, I was ignorant. Just then, the office door opened, and an elegant woman of about 40, with brown hair and intelligent eyes, walked in. Pardon the interruption, she said in a professional voice, but I believe there is something everyone needs to know. Alexander smiled. Patty, Ethan, this is Sarah Jenkins, my most competent private investigator. Sarah walked toward the center of the office carrying a thick folder. I've been investigating the Hayes family for the last 72 hours. More investigation, Richard asked in a weak voice. Investigation that reveals very interesting information about your family's real financial problems, Sarah replied, opening the folder. We already know about the debts, Carol said nervously. I'm not talking about the debts, Sarah countered. I'm talking about fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Tiffany stopped screaming. Fraud? I repeated. Sarah pulled out several documents. Richard Hayes has been inflating property valuations to obtain larger loans. He has created shell companies to justify non-existent expenses and has been evading taxes for 5 years. Richard collapsed into his chair. That's not true. I have the documents, Richard. The bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, the false contracts, the fabricated invoices. Sarah continued relentlessly. I also have evidence that Tiffany knew about all these activities. That's a lie, Tiffany yelled. Is this a lie? Sarah played a recording on the office loudspeaker. Tiffany's voice filled the office. Dad, when are you going to transfer the money from the Cayman account? I need to make the payment for the engagement ring. Tiffany went completely pale. How did you get that? The real question, Alexander intervened, is how Ethan knew none of this. Ethan looked at his wife with growing horror. Tiffany, did you know your family was involved in illegal activities? I, we, it was just to stay afloat. Was the marriage for that? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. To gain access to my salary? To ensure your family had legal protection? Tiffany didn't answer, but her silence was eloquent. Sarah continued. There's more. Tiffany has been having an affair with Jake Nelson, the son of Judge Nelson, for the past 8 months. What? Ethan shouted. Jake Nelson can influence his father, so the cases against the Hayes family are handled leniently, Sarah explained. Tiffany has been using that relationship as insurance. That's impossible, Carol yelled. Tiffany just got married yesterday. She got married yesterday and met with Jake last night, Sarah said, pulling out photographs. At the Marquis Hotel, room 1247. The photographs clearly showed Tiffany entering a luxury hotel with a handsome young man. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. on her wedding day. Ethan staggered as if he had received a physical blow. You were with another man on our wedding night. Tiffany had lost all her arrogance. Ethan, can I explain? Explain what? Ethan's voice trembled with pain and rage. Explain that our entire relationship has been a lie. Explain that you used me to protect your criminal family. Explain that you cheated on me on our honeymoon. It wasn't a honeymoon, Tiffany exploded, recovering her venom. We didn't even have a honeymoon. You stayed home crying over your mother. I stayed home trying to process that my wife had humiliated the most important woman in my life. Ethan roared. That's exactly the attitude that drove me crazy, Tiffany yelled back. Always your mother, always her feelings, never mine. Your feelings? I walked toward her, feeling decades of experience, dealing with difficult situations. What feelings? The satisfaction of hurting someone defenseless? The pleasure of humiliating a woman who never did you any harm? You hurt me by existing, Tiffany screamed, her composure completely destroyed. Your existence made Ethan feel guilty for having a better life. Your poverty made him feel bad about his success. That, Alexander said in a dangerously low voice, is the most twisted perspective I've heard in 40 years of legal practice. Richard tried to take control of the situation. Mr. Harding, my daughter is under a lot of stress. Your daughter is a sociopath, Alexander interrupted him, and you created her. Carol started crying. Please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I said, surprised by the calm in my own voice. I understand that you raised a daughter who believes people have value only based on their bank account. I understand that you taught her it's okay to hurt others if it benefits her. Ethan removed his wedding ring and placed it on Alexander's desk. I want a divorce. You can't, Tiffany yelled. We just got married. I married a lie, Ethan replied. A woman who doesn't exist. Alexander looked at Richard with a smile that could freeze hell. Richard, about those fraud documents, what are you going to do with them? Richard asked in terror. That depends entirely on your daughter. All eyes turned to Tiffany, who now realized she had more to lose than just money. Tiffany looked at the documents on the desk, then at her family, then at Ethan, and finally at me. For the first time since I met her, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the fear of losing money or status, but the fear of facing real consequences. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But what she didn't know was that Alexander had saved the biggest revelation for last. Mr. Harding, Tiffany said in a trembling voice, what exactly do you want? I already told you a genuine apology to Patty, on your knees, in front of witnesses. And if I do that, will you destroy the documents? Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Oh dear girl, the documents are only the beginning. What do you mean? Richard asked, panic growing in his voice. Sarah pulled out another folder, even thicker than the first. While investigating the financial fraud, I discovered something much more interesting. What could be more interesting than $25 million in fraud? Carol asked. A will, Alexander replied simply. What will? Ethan asked. The will of your paternal grandfather, Robert Miller's father, Grandpa Stephen Miller. I froze. Robert's father? But he died when Ethan was a baby. He died when Ethan was 6 months old, Alexander confirmed. But before he died, Stephen Miller had amassed a considerable fortune with his trucking company. That's impossible, I said. Robert never mentioned his father being rich. Because Robert never knew, Sarah explained. Grandpa Stephen had issues with Robert for marrying a woman pregnant with another man's child. In his pride, Robert never wanted to know anything about the family inheritance. Ethan sank heavily into a chair. Are you saying there's money that belongs to me? Not money, Alexander said with a mysterious smile. An empire. Sarah opened the second folder. Miller Transportation Holdings. Trucks, warehouses, commercial routes across the US and Canada. When Grandpa Stephen died, his lawyers tried to contact Robert, but he had moved and changed his contact information after marrying you, Patty. And what happened to the company? I asked. It was held in trust, waiting for the legitimate heir. For 35 years, it has been generating profits and growing. Alexander pulled out an official document. The current value of Miller Transportation Holdings is approximately $400 million. The silence in the office was absolute. Even Tiffany had stopped sobbing. 400 million, I repeated slowly. That belongs to Ethan as the sole heir of Robert Miller, Sarah confirmed. Ethan looked at me with glazed eyes. Mom, did you know anything about this? Nothing, I whispered. Robert never talked about his father. He just said they had differences and he preferred to build his own life. Stephen was a proud man, Alexander explained. When Robert married you, knowing he wasn't Ethan's biological father, Stephen felt betrayed. But his will was very clear. The inheritance would go to any child Robert considered his own, biological or not. Tiffany had been listening with rising horror. But if Ethan is rich on his own, then he no longer needs me to protect my family's crimes. Ethan finished for her. Richard approached desperately. Ethan, son, we're family. No, Ethan said firmly. Family doesn't humiliate its own people. Family doesn't use people. Family doesn't commit fraud and then seek legal protection through marriage. But Ethan, Carol pleaded, Tiffany made mistakes, but she loves you. Tiffany loves what I represent, Ethan corrected. She loved the security of my job with Alexander. Now she loves the idea of my Miller inheritance. But me, the person I really am, she has never loved. Alexander walked to the window. Richard, about those fraud documents. What are you going to do with them? Richard asked in a broken voice. That still depends on your daughter. We all looked at Tiffany, who now fully understood her situation. Her family was financially and legally ruined. Her marriage was destroyed. Her only chance to avoid jail depended on swallowing her pride. If I apologize, she said slowly, what happens next? Afterward, Alexander said, you'll have the opportunity to learn what respect means. You'll have the opportunity to grow as a person. And if I don't apologize, then you'll spend the next 10 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy, Sarah replied emotionlessly. Tiffany looked at her family, then at Ethan, then at me. Her shoulders slumped slowly. What? What do I have to say? The truth, I replied simply. Only the truth. Tiffany walked slowly toward me. With each step, her arrogance crumbled a little more. When she reached me, she stood for a long moment, fighting her pride. Finally, slowly, she knelt. Patty, she began in a broken voice, I ask for your forgiveness. Why? I asked softly. For humiliating you at my wedding, for treating you like you were less than a human being, for trying to push you away from Ethan. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. For judging you by your money instead of your character, and for not recognizing that you are an extraordinary woman who raised an extraordinary man all by yourself. I looked down at this young woman who had caused so much pain, but who now seemed genuinely broken and remorseful. Do you know why I forgive you, Tiffany? I asked gently. She shook her head, not daring to look up. Because holding a grudge would only hurt me, and because I hope you learn from this and become a better person in the future. I extended my hand to help her up. Get up, Tiffany. Everyone deserves a second chance. But as I helped her to her feet, Alexander looked at us with an expression that told me he still had one more card to play. 6 months later, I was sitting on the patio of my new lakeside home in the Hamptons, watching the sunrise over the water. My favorite coffee steamed in my chip mug, the same chip mug I'd had for 20 years, because some things don't need to change. Where are you guys watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But to understand how I reached this peace, I need to tell you what happened after that confrontation in the office. Alexander kept his word. The fraud documents never reached the authorities, but Richard had to sell everything he had to pay off his real debts. The Hayes family moved to a modest apartment in a middle-class suburb, where Carol learned to do her own grocery shopping, and Richard found work as an insurance salesman. Tiffany and Ethan divorced amicably 3 months later. She moved to Chicago, where she got a job as an administrative assistant, and I learned from Ethan is in therapy trying to understand why she had developed such superficial values. Have you ever talked to her? I asked Ethan during one of our Sunday dinners. Once, he admitted. She called to apologize again. She said therapy was helping her see how awful she had been, not just to me, but to a lot of people throughout her life. And how do you feel? Relieved, he answered honestly. I realized I never really loved her. I loved the idea of her, the image of success and sophistication she represented, but the real person, with all her cruelties and insecurities, I never knew. Ethan had taken control of Miller Transportation Holdings and discovered he had a natural talent for business. In 6 months, he had expanded operations into Canada and was negotiating contracts in Colombia. You know what the most ironic thing is? He told me one day as we reviewed his new company's financial reports. My whole life, I thought I needed to impress other people to be successful. It turns out I just needed to be true to who I really am. Alexander and I, well, that's the most complicated part of the story. During the first few weeks after the confrontation, we spent a lot of time together. He told me about the 40 years he had spent building his empire, but also about the loneliness he had felt the whole time. I dated a lot of women, he confessed one afternoon as we walked along the beach. Smart, beautiful, successful women, but none of them made me feel what I felt with you when I was 20. And now, I asked, do you feel the same? I feel more, he replied, taking my hand, because now I see you not just as the girl I fell in love with, but as the extraordinary woman you became. But there was something that worried me. Alexander, I'm 58 years old. I've lived a whole life. I have wrinkles, gray hair, the scars of life. And I'm 60, Patty. I have gray hair, lines on my face, and the weight of decades of difficult decisions. He stopped and faced me. Do you think real love is based on physical perfection? No. But when I saw you sitting alone at that table, humiliated and trying to maintain your dignity, I knew you were the same brave woman I fell in love with, only now you were even stronger. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony 2 months later. Just Ethan, my sister Cheryl, some close friends of Alexander's, and surprisingly Mr. Joe, the old man who had been the gardener at Alexander's parents' house when we were young. Mr. Joe, I said to him after the ceremony, how did you find us after so many years? The old man smiled with bright eyes. Child, I knew this day would come. When young Alex left for the States, he told me, Mr. Joe, someday I'm going to come back for Patty. I told him, I hope so, boy, I hope so. And you believed it would really happen? True love always finds a way to come home, he said simply. Now we live between New York City and the Hamptons. Alexander still runs his law firm, but he has reduced his workload. I have started volunteering at a community health center, using my nursing experience to help low-income families. Don't you feel weird being rich? My sister Cheryl asked me last week. I'm not rich, I corrected her. I'm married to a rich man. There's a difference. What's the difference? The difference is that my value as a person didn't change when my financial situation changed. I'm still the same woman who raised Ethan alone, who worked double shifts at the hospital, who sacrificed to give her son a better life. But now you have money. Now I have the opportunity to help other women who are where I was, I interrupted her. Single mothers working 2 jobs, nurses sacrificing for their families, women who need to know that their worth doesn't depend on their bank account. Ethan comes to visit us every Sunday. Sometimes he brings the woman he's seeing, Sarah, a history teacher who makes him laugh and who treats everyone with equal respect, regardless of their profession or income. Do you think Sarah could be the one? I asked him last week. I don't know if she's the one, Ethan replied with a smile, but I know she's real. She's not with me for my money or my connections. She's with me because she likes the person I am when I'm with her. This morning, while drinking my coffee and watching the sunrise, I received an unexpected text message on my phone. It was from Tiffany. Patty, the message read. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to tell you that I got a job at a public hospital here in Chicago, helping low-income families with medical paperwork. My therapist says it's important for me to learn to serve others without expecting anything in return. I wanted to thank you for showing me that forgiveness is possible, even when we don't deserve it. I hope someday to be half as strong as you. I showed the message to Alexander when he woke up. How does that make you feel? He asked me. Hopeful, I replied. Hopeful that people can change, that difficult experiences can teach us to be better. You know what I love most about you? He said, hugging me as we watched the sun come up. What? That after everything you've been through, all the cruelty you've faced, you still believe in the goodness of people. I don't believe in automatic goodness, I corrected him. I believe in the ability to choose goodness day after day. Alexander kissed my forehead. That's why I waited 40 years for you. Did you really wait all this time? Patty, my husband said, using my name like a caress. There are some loves that are worth a lifetime of waiting. As the sun finished rising over the mountains, I thought about all the pain that had led to this moment of peace. The humiliation at the wedding had been awful, but it had also been the catalyst that brought me back to the love of my life and taught my son the true value of respect. Sometimes the most painful things that happen to us are exactly what we needed to find our way home, and sometimes justice doesn't come as revenge, but as the opportunity to become the person you were always meant to be. At 58, I had finally learned that my worth never depended on what others thought of me. My worth was in my capacity to love, to forgive, to grow, and to choose kindness even when others chose cruelty. That is the true wealth, and it's the only one that truly matters.